A wealthy businessman owned a luxury store in the heart of the city. His shop was known for selling the most expensive clothes, watches, and accessories. He had worked hard to build his business, but over the years he had become cold and judgmental. He believed only rich, well-dressed people belonged in his store. One evening, as he checked the store's display, he noticed a homeless man stepping inside. The man wore an old, tattered jacket, and his hair was unkempt. He looked around the store with curious eyes, his hands tucked into his pockets. The owner's face twisted with disgust. He didn't want someone like that in his store. He immediately assumed the man had no money and might steal something. His heart filled with anger. He took a deep breath, straightened his suit, and marched toward the homeless man, ready to kick him out. The owner walked up to the homeless man with a stern expression. His expensive shoes clicked against the shiny marble floor. "What are you doing here?" he asked coldly, crossing his arms. The homeless man looked up surprised. "I was just looking around," he said in a calm voice. The owner frowned. "This is not a place for people like you. If you're not buying anything, leave." The homeless man hesitated. "I'm not causing any trouble," he said softly. "I just wanted to see the store." The owner scoffed. "See the store? Do you have any idea how much the things here cost? You can't afford a single button from one of these suits." The homeless man remained quiet, but his face showed embarrassment. He looked down at his worn-out shoes. "Out!" the owner snapped. Pointing at the door, a few customers turned their heads, watching the scene unfold. Some of them looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. The homeless man took a deep breath. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said. "I'll leave." He turned toward the door, but the owner wasn't satisfied. He waved at a security guard standing nearby. "Make sure he doesn't come back," he ordered. The security guard nodded and stepped forward. The homeless man sighed, giving one last glance at the store before stepping outside. The owner smirked, feeling proud of himself. He dusted off his suit and turned back to his customers. "This is a luxury store," he said with a smug tone. "We can't have just anyone walking in." He expected people to agree with him. Instead, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. The store fell silent for a moment. The customers glanced at each other, unsure of how to react. A woman near the cashier frowned, shaking her head. "That was unnecessary," she muttered under her breath. Another customer, a man in a business suit, crossed his arms. "He wasn't causing trouble," he said. "You didn't have to treat him like that." The owner rolled his eyes. "This is my store. I have standards. People like him don't belong here." The woman stepped forward. "People like him?" she repeated. "He was just looking. He wasn't stealing or begging. He didn't even touch anything." The owner scoffed. "He had no business being here. He can't afford anything, so why let him stay?" A teenager in the corner quietly pulled out his phone and started recording. He had captured most of the scene already, and now he zoomed in on the owner's smug expression. The homeless man, now outside, glanced back through the glass window. His shoulders slumped, and he walked away slowly. The woman at the counter shook her head. "You just humiliated a man for no reason." The owner sighed, annoyed. "If you don't like how I run my business, you're free to leave." The woman gave him a hard stare. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. A couple of other customers exchanged looks before following her. The man in the business suit glanced at the owner one last time. "That was heartless," he said before walking out as well. The owner watched, stunned, as people left one by one. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "They're overreacting." He turned back to the remaining customers. "Anyone else want to leave?" No one answered. A few people continued shopping, but something felt different. The air was heavy. The mood had changed. The teenager who had recorded everything smirked at his phone screen. "This is going viral," he whispered to himself before slipping his phone into his pocket. The store owner had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, the store owner arrived at his shop as usual. He adjusted his expensive suit and checked his reflection in the glass doors before stepping inside. Everything seemed normal, but as soon as he unlocked his phone, his stomach dropped. Hundreds of notifications flooded his screen. His social media accounts were blowing up. People were tagging his store, leaving angry comments. Confused, he clicked on one of the posts. It was a video. The video. The teenager from the store had uploaded it online, and it had spread like wildfire. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People were furious. Disgusting behavior. That poor man did nothing wrong. I'm never shopping at this store again. The owner's face turned red. He scrolled through endless criticism. People were calling for a boycott of his store. Some even posted 1-star reviews, warning others not to shop there. His heart pounded. How could one little incident cause so much trouble? His assistant walked in looking nervous. "Sir, we have a problem," she said. "I know," he snapped. "I've seen the video." "It's worse than that," she said. "The media picked up the story. Reporters are calling, asking for a statement." The owner clenched his jaw. "Ignore them," he said. "This will blow over." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, customers are canceling their orders. Our sales dropped overnight." The owner stiffened. "What?" She handed him a report. The numbers were bad. He had never seen such a sharp decline in business. Even longtime customers were turning away. He rubbed his temples. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "All because of some homeless guy?" The assistant gave him a look. "Because of how you treated him," she corrected. He scowled but said nothing. Hours passed and the situation got worse. More news outlets covered the story. More influencers shared the video. More people vowed never to shop at his store again. By the afternoon, the once busy store was nearly empty. Only a handful of customers walked in, and most left without buying anything. The owner sat in his office, staring at his phone screen. His business was in trouble, and for the first time he started to feel something unexpected: regret. The next morning, the store owner sat in his office, scrolling through endless angry comments. His reputation was in ruins. Sales had plummeted. News articles called him the heartless store owner. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "People are overreacting." A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant peeked in. "Sir, there's a man here to see you," she said. "He says it's important." The owner frowned. "Who is it?" She hesitated. "He didn't give his name, but he looks important." Curious and slightly annoyed, the owner stood up and walked to the front of the store. There, standing in a sharp black suit, was an older man with neatly combed gray hair. He had an air of authority, the kind that made people listen when he spoke. "Are you the owner?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yes," the owner replied, straightening his tie. "How can I help you?" The man studied him for a moment, then said, "I heard about the incident with the homeless man." The owner tensed. "Look, I was just protecting my business. He didn't belong here." The man's expression didn't change. "Do you even know who that man was?" The owner scoffed. "A homeless guy wasting my time." The man's eyes darkened. "That homeless guy was once one of the most successful businessmen in this city." The owner blinked, caught off guard. "What?" The man nodded. "His name is Richard Cole. He built a multi-million-dollar company from the ground up. But a few years ago, he lost everything: his wife, his business, his home. A series of bad investments, a market crash, it all crumbled. He gave jobs to hundreds of people when he was on top. Now, he has nothing." The owner felt a strange unease in his chest. "I had no idea." The man's voice was calm but sharp. "Of course you didn't. You judged him by his appearance and threw him out like trash." For the first time, the owner didn't have a response. The man sighed, shaking his head. "I was his business partner. He helped me when I was starting out. He gave me a chance when no one else did. That's why I came here, to see if you had the decency to make things right." The owner swallowed hard. He had never cared about homeless people before. He always assumed they were lazy or made bad choices. But this was different. His mind replayed the moment he kicked Richard out, the embarrassment on the man's face, the way he walked away in silence. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. For the first time since the video went viral, the owner didn't just feel frustration, he felt guilt. The store owner sat in his office long after the man had left. His mind raced. He kept replaying the moment he threw Richard out of the store, the embarrassment on his face, the way he had walked away without a word. He had assumed Richard was just another homeless man. But he had been wrong. Completely wrong. The owner sighed, rubbing his face. His business was failing. His reputation was destroyed. And now, for the first time, he actually felt the weight of his actions. He picked up his phone, opened the viral video, and watched it again. He had avoided doing so before, but now he forced himself to see what everyone else had seen. The way he had spoken, the way he had humiliated Richard in front of everyone. His stomach twisted. "This isn't who I want to be," he muttered. For years he had prided himself on running a successful business. He had always believed that people who worked hard succeeded, and those who struggled had only themselves to blame. But Richard's story shattered that belief. If a man who once owned a multi-million-dollar business could end up homeless, maybe the world wasn't as simple as he thought. He made a decision. The owner grabbed his coat and stepped outside. He had no idea where to find Richard, but he had to try. He walked through the streets, asking people if they had seen him. Most just shook their heads, but finally a street vendor pointed toward a nearby park. "I see him there sometimes, sitting on a bench," the man said. The owner thanked him and hurried over. When he reached the park, he saw Richard sitting alone on a wooden bench, staring at the ground. His hands were folded in his lap, his old jacket wrapped tightly around him. For a moment, the owner hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. But he took a deep breath and walked forward. "Richard," he said quietly. Richard looked up, surprised. His eyes narrowed slightly as he recognized the store owner. "You," he said simply. The owner swallowed hard. "I came to apologize." Richard didn't say anything. He just waited. The owner sighed. "I was wrong. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I treated you terribly, and now I see that." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry." Richard studied him for a moment. Then he let out a tired sigh. "I've heard worse," he said. "It's nothing new." That made the owner feel even worse. How many times had this man been treated like garbage? "I want to make it right," the owner said. Richard raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to do that?" The owner hesitated, then said, "I want to offer you a job." "At my store." Richard blinked, clearly surprised. "A job?" The owner nodded. "You were once a businessman. You know more than most people I hire. I think you could help me turn things around." Richard chuckled dryly. "You think hiring a homeless man will fix your reputation?" The owner felt his face heat up. "No," he admitted. I want to do the right thing." Richard studied him for a long time, then finally he nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll give it a shot." For the first time in days, the owner felt a weight lift from his chest. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change.